Samuel Bridger stood on the porch of his ranch house, wiping the sweat from his brow with a threadbare handkerchief. The Double B Ranch wasn't much. A modest house, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and 300 acres of stubborn land that yielded just enough to keep a man alive if he worked from dawn till dusk. Samuel had come west after the war, like so many others, seeking a fresh start far from the blood-soaked fields of Virginia. He'd found this plot of land abandoned, built it up with his own hands, and asked nothing from anyone. He kept to himself, treated his neighbors fairly when he saw them, and respected the Apache, whose ancestral lands these had been. Unlike many settlers, he'd never raised a rifle against the native people unless they raised one first, which, in his 5 years here, they never had. It was late September, and the day had been brutally hot. Samuel was looking forward to a simple dinner and an early sleep when he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but rhythmic. Footsteps, heavy ones. He turned toward the eastern ridge and felt his breath catch in his throat. Coming over the rise was a figure unlike anything he'd ever seen. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that the heat had finally addled his brain. But as the figure drew closer, there was no denying it. She was a girl, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, with the traditional dress and long black hair of the Apache people. But she was enormous, easily 12 feet tall, maybe more. Each of her steps covered 20 feet, and the ground trembled slightly with her approach. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding, and her eyes held a desperate, haunted look. Samuel's hand instinctively went to the rifle by the door, but something stopped him from grabbing it. The girl wasn't moving with aggression. She was stumbling, swaying with each step. As she came closer, he could see the wounds, cuts and bruises covering her arms and legs. Her dress torn and stained with blood, she collapsed about 50 yards from his house, falling to her knees with the impact that Samuel felt through the floorboards. Her breathing was labored, rasping. She looked at him with eyes that held no threat, only desperate need. For a long moment, Samuel stood frozen. Every instinct of self-preservation told him to run, to hide, to get his rifle and defend his property. But he'd been a soldier once, and he'd seen that look before, on the faces of wounded men lying in field hospitals, on civilians fleeing burning towns. It was the look of someone at the very edge of death. He made his decision. "Stay there," he called out, though he wasn't sure she understood English. "I'm going to help you." Samuel ran into his house and began gathering everything he could. He had been planning to slaughter one of his steers next week, but that plan changed now. He grabbed his hunting knife and headed to the pen where he kept his cattle. The steer he chose was one of his best, nearly 800 pounds. He said a quick prayer, both of thanks for the animal's life and for forgiveness at the waist, and did the work quickly. It took him nearly 2 hours to butcher enough meat. He loaded it into his largest wagon, along with every pot and pan he owned, filled with water from his well. He hitched up his strongest horse and drove the wagon out to where the giant girl lay. She had collapsed fully now, lying on her side. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Up close, Samuel could see she was even younger than he'd thought, perhaps 15. Despite her enormous size, there was something terribly vulnerable about her. "Here," he said, climbing down from the wagon. "Food, water." Her eyes opened and she looked at him with confusion, as if unable to believe what she was seeing. Samuel pulled out a large piece of meat and held it up. She reached out with a trembling hand, took it and bit into it with desperate hunger. Tears ran down her face as she ate. Samuel kept bringing her meat and water trip after trip. She consumed the entire steer and drank nearly 40 gallons of water. As color returned to her face and her breathing steadied, she looked at him with an expression of profound gratitude. She spoke then, in Apache, words Samuel didn't understand, but he understood the tone. She was thanking him. When she tried to stand, he held up his hands. "Rest," he said, gesturing to the ground. "You're safe here, rest." Whether she understood his words or his tone, she nodded and lay back down. Samuel brought out every blanket he owned and laid them over her massive form. Then he sat on his porch, rifle across his lap, not to threaten her, but to protect her if anyone else came along. As the stars came out, Samuel watched the giant girl sleep. He had no idea what the morning would bring, but he'd done what his conscience demanded. That would have to be enough. Samuel woke to the sound of movement. The giant girl was sitting up, moving slowly, but with more strength than the night before. She looked toward him and placed her enormous hand over her heart, then extended it toward him, a gesture of thanks that needed no translation. Then she stood, and with surprising grace for someone so large, began walking back toward the eastern mountains. Samuel watched her go, wondering if he'd dreamed the entire thing. He went about his morning chores, trying to process what had happened. He'd lost his best steer and most of his stored water, but he'd saved a life. That had to count for something. It was mid-morning when he heard it again, that sound like thunder. But this time, it was coming from multiple directions. Samuel stepped out onto his porch and felt the blood drain from his face. They were coming from the east, from the north, from the south. Apache warriors, hundreds of them, moving in perfect formation toward his ranch. They wore war paint and carried rifles, bows, and lances. At the front of the group rode what appeared to be several chiefs, distinguished by their elaborate dress and the respect the other warriors showed them. And walking among them, towering over them all, was the giant girl from the previous night. She was pointing toward Samuel's ranch. "Dear God," Samuel whispered. His hands shook as he reached for his rifle, but he knew it was useless. There were too many. Whatever was about to happen, he couldn't fight his way out of it. The warriors spread out, completely surrounding his ranch. Samuel counted them quickly. He estimated at least 280, maybe more. It was the largest gathering of Apache warriors he'd ever seen or heard of. They could wipe him off the face of the earth, burn his ranch to the ground, and be gone before anyone even knew what had happened. One of the chiefs, an older man with silver streaking his long hair and a face that spoke of wisdom and authority, rode forward. He stopped about 30 feet from Samuel's porch. Behind him the giant girl stood watching, her face unreadable. The chief raised his hand in a gesture of peace and spoke in heavily accented but clear English. "You are Samuel Bridger, the one they call the Quiet Settler." It wasn't a question. Samuel nodded slowly, lowering his rifle but keeping it in hand. I am Chief Nantan of the Chiricahua Apache. This is my granddaughter Elotea. Last night, you gave her food when she was dying. You gave her water. You protected her when she was helpless." Samuel glanced at the giant girl, Elotea, and then back to the chief. "She needed help. I did what any decent person would do." Chief Nantan's weathered face showed something that might have been a smile. "No, you did what a good person would do. Many settlers would have shot her out of fear. Many would have left her to die. You did neither." The chief dismounted and walked closer, his warriors watching intently. Samuel forced himself to stand still, to show no fear. "You do not know the story of my granddaughter," Chief Nantan said. "When she was born, she was normal-sized like any baby. But as she grew, she became different, larger. By the time she was 5, she was as tall as a grown man. By 10, she was twice that height. Our medicine men said she was blessed by the mountain spirits, that she was meant to be a protector of our people." The chief's face darkened. "But 3 weeks ago, Mexican soldiers attacked our village in the mountains. They had heard stories of the giant Apache girl and thought she was a monster to be destroyed. They came with many guns, many men. Elotea fought to defend the village, and she killed 20 soldiers before the others fled. But she was badly wounded, shot many times. She ran, trying to lead the soldiers away from our people, and got lost in the desert." Chief Nantan looked back at his granddaughter with obvious love. "For 2 weeks we searched for her. We found nothing. We thought she had died. Then yesterday a scout saw her walking back from the west, healthy and strong. She told us about you, about the white settler who gave her an entire cow, who gave her water, who protected her while she slept. She told us you watched over her all night to keep her safe." Samuel felt the weight of nearly 300 pairs of eyes on him. "I only did what was right. And for that," Chief Nantan said, raising his voice so all could hear, "you have earned the gratitude of the Chiricahua Apache. From this day forward, you are under our protection. Any who harm you will answer to us. Your cattle will not be touched by our people. Your crops will not be raided. You will be as one of our own." The chief reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a necklace made of turquoise and silver, clearly crafted by a master artisan. He held it out to Samuel. "Wear this, and all Apache will know you are a friend. You will be welcome in our camps. You will be safe in our lands." Samuel took the necklace with trembling hands. "Chief Nantan, I don't know what to say. Say you will accept our friendship. Say you will remember that not all Apache are at war with settlers, and not all settlers are our enemies." Samuel looked at the chief, at Elotea, at the hundreds of warriors surrounding his modest ranch. He thought about the hatred and violence that had consumed this territory for so long, the endless cycle of revenge and bloodshed. And he thought about the choice he'd made last night, to help rather than harm, to show compassion rather than fear. "I accept your friendship," Samuel said firmly, "and I give you mine in return." Chief Nantan nodded with satisfaction. Then he did something unexpected. He embraced Samuel, brief but genuine. When he stepped back, there was respect in his eyes. "You have given my family a great gift. We will not forget this." The chief turned and called out in Apache. Immediately warriors began moving. Samuel watched in amazement as they unpacked bundles from their horses. They brought him supplies, dried meat, woven blankets, pottery, seeds for planting. They brought him 3 young steers to replace the one he'd given to Elotea. They brought him skins for tanning and turquoise stones for trading. Elotea approached the porch, moving carefully to avoid damaging anything. She knelt down, bringing her enormous face closer to Samuel's level, and spoke in Apache. One of the warriors translated, "She says you are a good man. She says she will never forget your kindness. She asks if she may come visit you sometimes, to bring you gifts and to help you with your work." Samuel looked up at the giant girl's hopeful face and felt his heart swell. "Tell her she's welcome any time. Tell her this will always be a safe place for her." When the words were translated, Elotea's face broke into a radiant smile. She reached out with one massive finger and gently touched Samuel's shoulder, a gesture of affection and respect. The warriors spent the next hour helping Samuel. They repaired his leaning barn, fixed gaps in his fence, and even dug a new irrigation channel for his crops. They worked with efficiency and skill, and not once did any of them show hostility or resentment. When they were done, Samuel's ranch looked better than it had in years. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Chief Nantan prepared to leave. He clasped Samuel's hand one final time. "You have shown us that peace is possible, Samuel Bridger. We will remember this day, and we will make sure others remember it too." The warriors mounted up and began to depart, moving back toward the mountains. Elotea was the last to leave. She waved at Samuel, and he waved back, watching her massive form disappear over the ridge. When they were gone, Samuel sat down on his porch steps, the turquoise necklace heavy around his neck. His mind reeled from everything that had happened. In the span of a day, he had gone from an isolated settler barely scraping by to a man under the protection of the Apache, with enough supplies to last him through winter and then some, but more than that. He had discovered something he'd almost forgotten during his years of solitude, the power of simple human kindness, and how one act of compassion could change everything. Word of what happened at the Double B Ranch spread quickly through the territory. Other settlers heard that Samuel Bridger had been visited by hundreds of Apache warriors and had emerged not only unharmed, but enriched. Some called him a fool, others a traitor. But many more began to wonder if there might be another way to coexist with the native peoples, besides violence. Samuel continued his quiet life, working his land and keeping to himself. But true to Chief Nantan's word, he never had trouble with Apache raiders. His cattle were never stolen, his crops never burned. When other ranches were attacked in the ongoing conflicts, his remained untouched, and twice a month, like clockwork, Elotea would visit. She would help him with tasks that were difficult for a man of normal size, moving heavy rocks, reaching the roof for repairs, pulling stumps from the ground with ease. In return, Samuel would cook for her and tell her stories about the world beyond the desert. He taught her English, and she taught him Apache. They became unlikely friends, the giant girl and the quiet settler. On one such visit, about 6 months after their first meeting, Elotea arrived carrying something massive in her arms. As she got closer, Samuel realized it was a boulder, perfectly round and smooth from a riverbed, nearly 5 feet in diameter. She set it down gently in front of his house and spoke in careful English. "For you, so you remember." Samuel walked around the boulder and saw that she had carved something into it, a picture of a man standing next to a giant girl with the sun rising behind them. Below it she had carved words in both Apache and English. "Kindness is stronger than fear. Friendship is stronger than hate." Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. "It's beautiful, Elotea." "Thank you." She smiled, that same radiant smile from the first day. "You saved my life." "This is small gift." "It's not small at all," Samuel said. "It's perfect." As the years passed, Samuel's ranch became something of a neutral ground, a place where Apache and settlers could meet without violence, where trade could happen, where understanding could grow. It wasn't always easy, and trust was slow to build. But every time someone expressed doubt or fear, Samuel would tell them the story of the night he chose compassion over caution, and how that choice had brought him not disaster, but blessing. Chief Nantan visited occasionally, always treating Samuel with the respect due to an honored friend. During one visit, when both men were sitting on Samuel's porch watching the sunset, the chief spoke thoughtfully. "You know, Samuel, when Elotea first came back and told us what you had done, some of my warriors wanted to test you. They wanted to come here ready for war, to see if you would respond with violence or fear. But I told them no. I told them that a man who would feed a dying girl and ask nothing in return was not a man to test with weapons." Samuel looked at the chief. "What made you so certain?" "Because I have lived long enough to know that true courage is not found in violence. It is found in compassion, especially when compassion is difficult. You could have turned away. You could have shot my granddaughter out of fear. But you chose the harder path, the path of kindness. That takes more bravery than any battle." Samuel nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in those words. "I was a soldier once, Chief. I've seen enough violence to last a lifetime. I came west to get away from it, to build something instead of destroy. When I saw Elotea that night, I saw a chance to do that, to build rather than destroy. And look what you have built," the chief said, gesturing to the ranch and the peaceful land around it. "Not just a home, but a bridge between our peoples. That is a greater legacy than any warrior could claim." The two men sat in comfortable silence, watching the desert transform in the fading light. In the distance, they could see Elotea playing with some Apache children who had come with their parents for a trading visit. Despite her enormous size, she was gentle and patient, letting them climb on her arms like she was a living playground. "She's happy here," Chief Nantan observed. "Happier than I've seen her in years. Among our people, some fear her size, even though they respect it. But here, with you, she can simply be herself. She's always welcome," Samuel said. "This place wouldn't be the same without her visits." As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, the Apache families said their farewells and began the journey back to their camps. Elotea helped Samuel light the lamps around his property, another routine they'd developed. As she could reach the high poles with ease, "Samuel," she said in her much improved English, "I have question. Ask away why you helped me that night." "You not know me." "You not know if I dangerous? Why?" Samuel thought about his answer carefully. "Because, Elotea, I believe that we're all the same underneath. Apache, white settler, giant, normal-sized, we all need food, water, shelter, and kindness. When I saw you lying there, I didn't see something to fear. I saw someone who needed help, and I'd want someone to help me if I was in that position." Elotea nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "My grandfather says you are a wise man," Samuel chuckled. "I'm just a man trying to do right. That's all any of us can do." "Is enough," Elotea said with certainty. "More than enough." 3 years after that fateful night, Samuel received word that a cavalry unit was moving through the territory, hunting Apache. The commander, a colonel fresh from back east, had no understanding of the delicate peace that had developed in this region. He saw only hostiles to be eliminated. Samuel knew that if the cavalry attacked Chief Nantan's people, the fragile peace would shatter, and the bloodshed would be terrible on both sides. He had to do something. He rode out to meet the cavalry column, the turquoise necklace visible around his neck. The soldiers were initially suspicious, but Samuel's reputation had grown over the years, and the colonel agreed to hear him out. "Colonel, I'm asking you to reconsider your plans," Samuel said. "The Apache in these parts aren't hostile. We've had peace for 3 years. Trade has flourished. No settler has been harmed." The colonel, a stern man with a thick mustache and hard eyes, shook his head. "Mr. Bridger, I understand you've developed a relationship with the savages, but my orders are clear. I'm here to pacify the region." "The region is already pacified," Samuel insisted. "What you'll do is start a war that doesn't need to happen. Are you questioning my orders, civilian?" Before Samuel could answer, there was a sound like approaching thunder. The soldiers grabbed their rifles, formations tightening. Over the ridge came Elotea, moving fast, with Chief Nantan and a group of warriors following behind her. The colonel's face went white. "What in God's name? That's Elotea," Samuel said calmly. "She's the granddaughter of Chief Nantan, and she's under my protection, just as I'm under theirs." Elotea stopped about 50 yards from the cavalry column, close enough to be imposing, but far enough not to seem threatening. Chief Nantan rode forward, stopping beside Samuel. "I am Chief Nantan of the Chiricahua Apache," he said in clear English. "I have heard that you come to make war on my people." The colonel tried to regain his composure. "I come to enforce the law and protect American settlers." "The settlers here need no protection from us," the chief replied. "Ask any of them. Ask Samuel Bridger, who has lived in peace on our lands for 8 years. Ask the families who trade with us, who share water rights with us, who have never been harmed by my people. I have my orders." "Then perhaps," Elotea said, her voice booming but not aggressive, "your orders are wrong." The colonel stared up at the giant girl. Samuel could see the man's worldview crumbling. Everything he'd been told about the Apache, about the West, was being challenged by the reality before him. "How long has this peace existed?" the colonel asked slowly. 3 years, Samuel said. "Since the day I helped Elotea when she was wounded and dying. Since the day I chose kindness over fear. And in those 3 years, this region has been more peaceful and prosperous than any other in the territory." The colonel looked at Samuel, then at Chief Nantan, then up at Elotea. Samuel could see the internal struggle on the man's face. Duty versus reason, orders versus reality. Finally, the colonel spoke. "I'll send word back to the fort. Request clarification on my orders, given the local conditions. Until I receive new orders, we'll make camp and observe." It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was enough. Chief Nantan nodded with respect. "You are a wise man, Colonel. Perhaps wiser than those who sent you here." As the cavalry set up camp and the Apache withdrew, Samuel felt the tension slowly dissipate. He knew this wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more conflicts to navigate. But for now, peace held. Elotea knelt down beside him. "You are a brave man, Samuel. You stand between 2 armies. I stand between friends," Samuel corrected. "And friends don't let friends kill each other if they can help it." That night, something remarkable happened. The colonel accepted an invitation to dine with Samuel, Chief Nantan, and several Apache leaders. It was awkward at first, the conversation stilted and formal. But as the evening wore on and stories were shared, the barriers began to break down. The colonel learned that Chief Nantan had children and grandchildren, that he worried about their futures, that he wanted peace as much as any white settler. The Apache leaders learned that the colonel was following orders he didn't fully understand, that he'd come west expecting one thing and found something entirely different. By the end of the night, understanding hadn't fully bloomed, but the seeds had been planted. Samuel Bridger lived another 25 years on the Double B Ranch. He never married, never had children of his own, but he was never alone. Elotea visited him regularly until his dying day, bringing her own children to meet him. Yes, she eventually found another giant like herself, a young man from a distant tribe, and they built a life together in the mountains. When Samuel finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, it seemed like the entire territory came to his funeral. White settlers stood beside Apache warriors. The cavalry colonel, now a general and retired, came to pay his respects, and Elotea was there, tears streaming down her enormous face, saying goodbye to the man who had saved her life and, in doing so, had changed the course of history for an entire region. They buried Samuel on a hill overlooking his ranch, with a view of both the settlements to the west and the Apache lands to the east. The boulder Elotea had given him years before was moved to mark his grave, with a new inscription added below the old one, Samuel Bridger. He chose kindness when fear would have been easier. He built bridges when walls were expected. He proved that peace is possible. Years later, historians would study the New Mexico territory and wonder at the remarkable peace that had existed in one particular region during a time of terrible violence. They would write papers and books trying to explain it, attributing it to geographic factors, political circumstances, or economic conditions. But those who had lived through it knew the truth. Peace had come because one man, on one night, had looked at someone in need and chosen to help rather than harm. Because that one act of kindness had rippled outward, creating understanding where there had been fear, building friendship where there had been hostility. Elotea lived to be very old, and she told the story of Samuel Bridger to her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She told it to anyone who would listen. Really, the story of the night she was dying in the desert, and a quiet settler gave her everything he had without asking for anything in return. And she always ended the story the same way. Never forget that kindness is the strongest force in the world. Stronger than armies, stronger than hatred, stronger than fear. One act of kindness can change everything. Samuel Bridger taught me that, and I have spent my life trying to honor that lesson. The Double B Ranch still stands today, preserved as a historical site. Visitors come from all over to see the place where an unlikely friendship changed history. They read the inscriptions on the boulder, walk the grounds where Apache and settlers once met in peace, and learn the story of the giant girl and the quiet settler. And sometimes, on quiet desert nights, locals swear they can still feel it, that sense of possibility, that hope that bridges can be built and peace can be achieved. If only we have the courage to choose kindness over fear. That is the legacy of Samuel Bridger, the man who gave food to a giant Apache girl and in return received something far more valuable than protection or riches. He received proof that compassion can triumph over conflict, that understanding can overcome hatred, and that one person's choice to do right can echo through generations. In a land often defined by violence and division, Samuel built something different. He built hope, and that perhaps is the most heroic thing any person can do.